Heat check. Basketball, basketball, college. Basketball, basketball, college. Oh, is that time already? Whoa.
Welcome into another episode of the Heat Check Hangout, your number one source for all things basketball, basketball, college. I'm your host, Brian Ralph, joined as always by my co-host, Connor Hope. No, it's been a few weeks since we've been with you guys. Sometimes real life gets in the way, and we have real, actual jobs outside of this, and it was a very hectic December, and calendars just didn't match up. So here we are trying to bring you one before the holidays, and then we'll hopefully get back into our weekly routine once New Year hits. Connor, how you doing, man?
Doing well. No, not traveling for work this week, luckily. So, just podcasting from my parents' house. So still traveling, just not for work, which is nice.
Yes. So I say that too. If you want to make sure we have this every week, make sure you listen, rate 5 stars, tell your friends, all that stuff. Help us grow so that we can do stuff like this and not have to do our actual work. As long as that happens, you want to help us grow. Obviously, that helps incentivize us to come on and do this for you. But just a little busy this week. But December certainly had no shortage of action. More teams at the top of the poll, different teams at the top of the polls, Connor, than I think we thought there was going to be start of the season, right? Purdue's right up there, UConn, Houston's up there as well, but some of those early season surprises. So what I thought we would do this episode is play a little contender pretender. Which one of these teams that have had a really strong non-conference play, should we take that as who they are now and make a firm statement and they're a real contender? Or was it something kind of like, I want to pick on Iowa State, something like Iowa State last year where it's a bit of a facade and they're going to come back to the pack a little bit once conference play starts. So let's start right at the top with Purdue. Number one in the country, second straight year they've hit that mark, started the season unranked. Zach Edey is the National Player of the Year frontrunner. To you, is this a real contender, or are they maybe a little bit overrated?
I think it's mixed with Purdue. I mean, you have Zach Edey, who's breaking every player comparison analytic that you throw at him. No big is doing what he's done or is doing. No big has done what he is doing with the minutes he's getting and just the pure dominance. That said, what we've seen over the last couple of games with the guard play is a bit of inconsistency. And then in the game where they were missing Edey, it took them about 10 to 15 minutes to actually figure out how to play without him on the floor, which, again, you head into March, you're hoping you have Edey, but you need the guards to be more consistent. So I'm going to say that they are a contender, but I don't trust them to win 6 games in a row against the level of competition in the tournament.
Yeah, I think they're a contender, but I also think they've sort of maxed out who they are and what they can be. If Fletcher Loyer and Braden Smith keep playing at the level they played at in late November, early December, then yeah, this is a Final Four contender, national championship contender, and a favorite to make it that far in the tournament. But to rely on 2 freshmen to play at that level all the time is not something that's going to happen, particularly when they aren't the most highly rated or the most rawly gifted players out there, right? You're going to have some ups and downs with them, and I think we've started to see a little bit of that as you show off your Purdue sweatshirt for those of you watching on YouTube. I think this is a much better team than we thought it was going to be. Like I certainly think that they are the favorite in the Big Ten and should be. I think this is a second weekend team, should definitely be there for the second straight year. Going further than that, though, and making the Final Four is going to come down to me, Loyer and Smith maintaining that high level of play and finding that again. I'm going to put them in the contender category. I don't think that they are the top contender. Like, they would not be number one for me in that regard. But I also think that there is some real legitimacy to what they've done the first 2 months.
No, I definitely agree. I think when you're looking at Purdue and the way they play and the caliber of their offense, I mean, you can't discount them being able to win 6 games. I just don't trust it with the way the guards have played the last couple of weeks.
UConn is the other team that came from nowhere. There was hope that UConn would have a breakout season among UConn fans, and some of the Big East thought they'd have that as well. But I don't think anybody projected this and the start that they've had, being undefeated, going into the top 2 ranked number 2 right now, right behind Purdue. Adama Sanogo has been phenomenal. They've gotten great contributions up and down that roster. Really, more depth than they've had since Danny Hurley has been there. I'm curious your take on this UConn team, a team you follow closely. They're another team that I feel like personally is like they're playing at max level right now, which might be good enough this year. But I'm curious to know your take on them.
I think I'd put them in the same boat as Purdue. Definitely a contender. You look at the way they've played compared to the rest of the Big East. If Creighton, and we can talk about Creighton later, if Creighton can bounce back in the way that they showed the other night, I think you can expect a good game between those two. But UConn, it is not outside the realm of possibility the way that UConn has played, where they have won every single game by double digits, that they finish Big East play with like 1 or 2 losses. That said, the difference between UConn and Purdue for me is just the fact that you have Tristan Newton, who's a senior, you have Joey Calcaterra, who's a senior, Andre Jackson's a junior, Jordan Hawkins is a sophomore. Like, you have experience up and down that backcourt, right. and that's not even talking about the 2 big men that have been absolutely fantastic to start the year. So I trust UConn a little bit more in March, just because they have that experience. Even if I think the ceiling for Purdue might be a little bit higher, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with that. UConn does not have the reliance on unproven players to play at an absurd level that Purdue does.
Yes.
Right? Like, UConn, you kind of know what you're going to get from them, and so far it's been incredible.
Mm-hmm.
My only issue with UConn, projecting them long term as being a Final Four national championship contender, is is the guard play going to continue? Like, is the top end going to be there? They had been Adama Sanogo and role players. Right? Those role players, though, have collectively taken a step forward and contributed in huge ways up and down the roster. They've each had games where they've taken over and looked incredible. Right? You can go 10, 11 deep, and you have guys who have maybe not won, like game MVPs on Ken Palm or anything like that, but were a significant reason why UConn won a particular game. I don't know if they're going to be able to push the level of play much higher than it is right now. Like, it feels like they're maxing it out, but as I said, there isn't a great team this year in the country. And if UConn can maintain this level of play, it might be good enough to win a national championship. I know teams are going to get better as the season goes on, but UConn has looked the part so far. They've looked great. And now they haven't been tested in the way I think some of the other top teams have been tested. They've played a lot of brand name quad 2 games and handled their business in those games. And they do have the win over Alabama, which is certainly nice. We'll talk about Alabama a little bit later on in the episode. But I'm curious to see once they get into the Big Ten play and they face Creighton, they face Xavier, face Marquette. The other teams that are projected to, who knows if Villanova continues to turn things around. They get into some of those games in road environments, how things go. They're 2-0 in conference play. At Butler, they struggled for about 30 minutes. Against Georgetown, they struggled at home for about 30 minutes, right? I'm not worried about UConn. Let's put it that way. But I don't know if they are going to be like a top 2 team the rest of the season.
Yeah, and I think the thing with UConn and Purdue, too, and I know Ant Wright brought it up earlier in the year, is that with the exception of like the 2014 Louisville team, every national champion has had an NBA guard in their backcourt. And, jury's still out on some of these players, but there's no clear-cut NBA guard in either of these backcourts. And so you're relying on a lot of role players. Not Purdue. UConn's relying a lot on Andre Jackson to just do everything but score. And so you're looking at backcourts that aren't uber talented, right? They're really good. They're really effective. They're really efficient right now. But when they get into March and you get the the Dukes or the UNCs or the Creightons, and they're playing really well, and they're hitting their peak, hopefully, for those teams, can those backcourts keep up? And I'm just not confident that they can do that. Let's say, I mean, they're going to play a 15 seed or a 16 seed in the first round. Let's say 5 games in a row. I'm still not confident they can do that.
I'm with you there. I think they'll go further than UConn teams have, certainly in recent memory. But the Final Four National Championship is asking a lot. Houston's been there and done that, though.
Yeah, and for UConn, it's one of those things where, like, the last 2 national champions, right? Those were 2 UConn teams that kind of came out of nowhere, so to speak. You had Kemba Walker and Shabazz Napier. Like, that that was why they won. And you don't have that guard on UConn this year. And so while the team as a whole might be better, you don't have that guy who can just take over a game and win it.
We see it every March. Guard play matters. Guard play matters immensely the later and later you get into the tournament. Guard play isn't an issue for Houston. They got number 1, lost the home game to Alabama. That's been the only blemish on the resume so far. Have a lot of guys playing really well. Marcus Sasser has not been the National Player of the Year caliber guy we thought he might be, but he's still been solid. Tremark has been solid. Jamal Shedd's been solid. We're seeing a lot from hey, buddy. We're seeing a lot from Jarris Walker, freshman front court, who's doing a lot for them, carrying some load up there. I still really like this Houston team. Their style of play defensively, what they've gotten inside from Walker, combined with what I know they can do in the backcourt. Like we talked about them potentially being the best backcourt in the country. We can't say that guard play matters and then not talk about Houston's backcourt and the fact that that's going to be a difference maker for them. And as they get into American Conference play, Memphis might be their only test the rest of the way. With their guards and what they've been getting inside from Walker, I think they're a legitimate contender, and I have more faith in them making a Final Four than I do either Purdue or UConn.
Yeah, I have more faith in them making the Final Four. I think they are Tennessee with a bit more of a reliable offense. Ceiling isn't there for this offense that it is in the way for Tennessee, but I don't think the floor is quite as low, just the way they play. And they have the better guard play. I trust them to get to the Final Four. And then once they're in the Final Four, right, it's in Houston. They've shown that they can compete. So, yeah, I think they're the first one on this list that I would say is a contender that I trust to win 6 games in a row in March.
I'm with you. And part of that's because we've seen it before. Like, it's been 3 straight years, I think, or 3 straight tournaments of solid runs from Houston, including the Final Four berth in 2021. It would not surprise me if they got back there. It certainly wouldn't surprise me. I think they'll be number 1 for a good portion of the rest of the season, partially because of the level of play, but also the fact that they're not going to be tested in American Conference play. Like, they're kind of on that old Gonzaga track, I will say, where on a St. Mary's down year, Gonzaga would go into conference play and rise to number 1 and hang there because they were better, everybody in the WCC. Right, WCC has gotten better, obviously. We've talked about that plenty of times the past couple of years with Gonzaga. But outside of Memphis, I don't think anybody can touch Houston in the American, and I think they'll see the benefit of that when it comes to AP poll and the AP voting.
Yeah.
Kansas is up next. Speaking of teams we trust, the defending national champions. We're not necessarily held in that same regard going into the season, just because of what they lost last year. But sitting here with 1 loss, a couple of impressive wins on their resume already. Can Bill Self do it again?
I mean, yeah. And I think what we're seeing is while Jalen Wilson is still the best player, he's the star player for Kansas. He's in the National Player of the Year conversation. He's in the AP poll or AP All-American conversation. I think we're seeing more just all-around play from some of these other players than I think we expected. Like, DeJuan Harris looks like a top 10 point guard. Grady Dick is doing more than just scoring, right? He's doing a little bit of everything. KJ Adams looks really good. Kevin McCullough is fitting in nicely. So the pieces all fit. They might not have that dominant prototypical big like they've had in the past, which I know is one point of contention. But again, guard play wins in March, not necessarily. I mean, you need a good big man, but you don't necessarily need a dominant one to win in March. And so right now, I don't think it's a stretch to call Kansas the favorite, based on the way they've played so far this year. Are they my favorite? I'm not quite there yet, but I think if someone names Kansas as the favorite, like it's not crazy anymore.
Yeah, you could make that argument for sure. It is dependent upon, though, Grady Dick continuing to be an all Big 12 caliber player and Jalen Wilson doing the same. Jalen Wilson has been highly efficient this year, despite only shooting like 33% from three. That's how good he's been everywhere else. And Grady Dick has been shooting at an uber efficient level, which that's the hype he came in with, that kind of play. But again, you're asking a freshman to keep that up. That's the question with Kansas for me. We talked all last year about Kansas and that Ochai Agbaji was really good. You knew Jalen Wilson could get you 10, 15 points a game. McCormack would be the same way, but they needed Remy Martin to be that second shot creator and playmaker. Eventually happened. They won the national championship because of it. Dick and Wilson have to be those two guys. Wilson's got to take his game up consistently and maintain that. And same thing with Dick. That's the key for me. And we've seen them be tested. I don't doubt that. But this time last year, this is the same conversation we're having about Baylor, right? Where Baylor was really, really good, looked the part, and then kind of fell apart. And injuries had played a role in that, certainly. But guys couldn't sustain it. Dick being a freshman, Wilson being somebody who previously has flashed this and then not sustained it. I'm a little hesitant to anoint them as the favorite for me. But again, the argument can be made. I'm a huge fan of KJ Adams, and him being able to hold his own at the 5 against some really good big men that Kansas has played, I think has really opened up Kansas and elevated the floor from where I thought it would be. Final Four berth, certainly on the table. Don't know about national championship, but they are certainly much more contender than a pretender.
Yep.
We'll round out the top 5, talking here with Arizona. Another one of those early season surprises who people thought would be good. You thought would be really good. I thought they would take a step back. Looks like I've been wrong so far. I think they have the nation's best front court with Omar Ballo and Tubelis. Guard play, though, still gives me some questions. But for you, contender or pretender for Arizona?
I'm going to say pretender.
Yes. Pretender?
Yeah, pretender.
Okay.
Look, they have the best front court. Back, I mean, Kerr Kriisa. Like, we've seen the Kerr Kriisa of last year show up at points this year. And you talk about their dominance, and you talk about who they played. But, like, San Diego State doesn't look as good as we thought they were going to. Creighton hasn't been as good. I mean, the loss to Arizona was the start of that 6-game-in-a-row losing streak. Indiana is what we thought they were going to be.
What we
but
thought,
not what the national media thought they were going to be. Tennessee is a good win. Like, Tennessee is a good win. They won that at home. Fantastic win. The loss to Utah, I think, exposed a bit of what your worries are when it comes to Arizona, right? Mm-hmm. If they're not hitting shots, if they're not playing efficiently, they get held to 66. They can't win those types of games. I mean, you talk about, I mean, it's kind of almost like the Gonzaga of the past few years on steroids, right? Really, 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 really good offense with a defense that, I mean, you have Ballo and Tubelis. Your defense should have a really strong core, and it just doesn't. So, and a lot of that has to do with tempo. But I just don't trust. Like, this is the first team where I would be surprised if they won 5 games in a row against top 30 competition.
Mm-hmm. The thing that win over San Diego State, win over Creighton, Indiana, Tennessee, the fact they've done it on neutral courts in 3 of those cases, to me, tells me they can win like a Sweet 16 game.
Yeah.
Right? Like, that's the level of competition they would face in a round of 32 in a Sweet 16. I think the front court and the system can get them that far. The question then becomes, all right, when you get to the cream of the crop and you're in the Elite Eight, Final Four, can you win that game? That's where I don't know. That's where I think the guard play is going to come back and hurt them. That's where I think some of the defensive issues, the fact you play 2 bigs and aren't a great rim protecting team, could come back to haunt you as well. It will depend on matchups, of course, as everything does in March. But I'm with you. I think I lean more pretender than contender, but it depends, for me, how you're defining contender. Because every team in the country is flawed this year, and the system they play lends itself to stressing the opponent for sure. And if the opponent's not on their game, Arizona's going to run you off the court. That said, they need Kirk Creeks to become more consistent. When Courtney Ramey has looked good, Arizona, to me, has looked like one of the 2 or 3 best teams in the country. But Courtney Ramey has those ups and downs as well. So if you can find consistency from Creesa and Ramey, I think you're looking at a legit contender. But until we see that, I'm holding off on buying.
And I think we've seen stretches, even in games they've won, where they just haven't looked good.
Yes.
You can do that in games in November, December. I mean, you can do that in the Pac-12 play, right, and still win those games.
Yeah.
But when you're facing a Houston or a Kansas or, heck, even like a Virginia, who we'll talk about next, they're not going to let you get back into it as easily as some of these teams that they faced, either because of their offense or because of their defense, right? So I think you can't be so dependent on runs to get back into games as Kansas has been in some games this year.
Well, let's dive into Virginia. Arizona was your first real pretender. They're my first real pretender. I'll dive into why here in a second. But for you, is this a team you trust?
No.
Why?
I mean, they because again, it's the same old Kihei Clark, it's the same guys. The offense has looked better because the offense is just running more efficiently. The defense has looked, I think, slightly better than it did last year. So they look really good, but they lost a game to Houston at home. They lost to Miami on the road in close games, really good games. But I think we'll see more from them in ACC play. I think there's still one contender from the ACC that I'm willing to say is still a contender, and it's not Virginia. So
it's Miami.
No, it's not Miami either.
The thing with Virginia that gets me is they shot up the polls, and deservedly so, with what they did in Vegas at the main event, beating Baylor and beating Illinois. And we'll get to both those teams a little bit later in this. Since then, though, you have a 2-point win over Michigan, 5-point win over a bad Florida State team, 5-point win over James Madison, lost to Houston and lost by Miami. That the final score is much closer than the game actually was. They have not played well since coming back from Vegas. Now, the Michigan game, that's a win at Ann Arbor. That's pretty big. It's also the last big game Reese Beekman had. And talking about their offensive woes, Reese Beekman is the guy who gets them out of that and gives them that dynamic playmaker and somebody defenses have to worry about, making plays off the dribble. You'll notice a theme for me. If you don't have a guy who can make plays off the dribble like that, I don't think you're necessarily a real contender, unless you have somebody like Zach Edey or Thomas Nogo inside. If Beekman's that guy, Virginia is a Final Four threat. But the last month of the season, he has not been that guy. He has not been who he was the first month of the season. I have some faith he can get it back because of the just physical tools and skill set that he has. But he's playing like he did last year, and that's not good enough for this Virginia team.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, since the Michigan win, they failed to cross 65 in any of the games, and only one of those games was against a top 90 defense on Ken Palm. So like,
yeah,
the offense has returned to earth a little bit, and they don't have a good enough defense for their offense to be anything but top 40 consistently, and win a championship.
We've talked about Virginia's defense, I think, the past several years as if it was still this elite unit, because it was for so long, right, under Tony Bennett. The last 3 years, though, 2020, 2021, 36 in KenPom, adjusted defensive efficiency. The last season, with this same core group, 59th. So far this season, 21st. Still good, but if you're not going to be able to score, you need to be that elite Virginia defense that's leading the country by a lot defensively to make up for it. And they're not right now.
Yep.
The next team we're going to talk about is, I think, one of the more interesting cases. Because we're going to talk about Texas. On the court, there are the concerns we thought there would be with shooting. But I also think they've proven more to us than I think either of us would have expected. If they had their coach, I don't think this is a conversation. But they do not have their coach. And it doesn't seem like they will have their coach for at least the foreseeable future, if ever.
Yeah.
So that throws a little wrinkle in here. How are you looking at Texas moving forward the rest of the season with everything that's going on?
So Texas, to me, is in a similar situation to Purdue and UConn with Beard, in that I think they're a contender. The fact that they shoot 33% from three puts me in a spot where I don't trust them to win those 5 games in a row. 6 games, but they'd be a 2 seed, so 5 games. Without Beard, I don't think they have a shot. I mean, it's just Beard instills such a buy-in defensively that they should still have as a culture. But I'm sorry, Texas Tech fans. Beard was the reason Texas Tech went that deep as they did before he made the jump to Texas. Without him, I'm not sure the defense holds up at the level that it was at the beginning of the season. And how many games are you going to get, like the game against Gonzaga, where Tyrese Martin and Marcus Carr just can't miss? Like, not many. And so, for me, they're a really good team. I wouldn't even be surprised if they made the Final Four. But I don't think they can beat a team like Houston or a team like Kansas or a team, I don't know, like, heck, even Tennessee, that'll just grind it out with you. And that, to me, is the reason why I think they're a pretender.
They have really good talent. And Beard assembled a coaching staff that was very good and had a lot of former head coaches on it. So I don't think there's going to be a lack of real leadership from there. Or, this roster is one of the oldest and most experienced in the country. The amount of fifth-year seniors they have is really, really high. So I don't think there's going to be a giant cliff they fall off. I think there's still a second weekend team could contend for a Big 12 title. But to your point, you do need, Beard is a really, really good coach for a reason. And not everybody can be him and make the tweaks and game plans that he needs to do and the six team need to do when you get into a one-loss scenario in the NCAA tournament. They have the major flaw with the lack of shooting. And we've talked about a lot of teams that have one major flaw. But I think, trust Texas's backcourt more than, Arizona's backcourt.
Yeah.
Or more than
absolutely.
Or more than UConn's backcourt. Because Marcus Carr and Tyrese Hunter are very good players, elite defenders, guys who have shown the ability to create, make shots, go off for 20, 30 points a game. You know, like we've seen that from them. In a year where there's not a ton of guards, we've gone through the top 7 teams in the country so far, and we're going to go through a whole bunch more. There are flaws with all of them. And if you get good Marcus Carr and good Tyrese Hunter, they can win the whole thing without Beard. I don't think you get that, though, without Beard on the sidelines. And I also don't know if Beard comes back, what the distractions are going to look like, right? Like, I don't want to speculate about any of that stuff. I think all that's kind of a pipe dream and not going to happen for Texas fans in terms of getting the best out of Hunter and Carr. But having them, I think they'll still win some tournament games, but I think they're a pretender when it comes to making it to Houston and winning a national championship.
Yep.
You brought up Tennessee. You talk about the Vols right now. I've been out on this Tennessee team for like 4 or 5 years in a row. I'm still out on this team. Tell me why I'm wrong.
You're not. I mean, this is the Tennessee team
Boom.
we thought they would be. A team that has an elite ceiling. But they just, for some reason, every year they have games where they get into ruts. And you can survive those games. I mean, you maybe not even win them, but you can survive having those games in the regular season, right? I would put Tennessee, I mean, there's a three-team race for SEC regular season champion. Tennessee might be at the top. I would argue it's a different team. But they you know, I think the percentage of games where that offensive lull happens is higher than the percentage of games that they would want for it to happen if you're looking to win 6 games in a row in March, right? They just, there's going to be a game, it could be the first weekend, it could be the Sweet 16 or Elite 8, where they're just going to fall into a rut and they're going to be playing a team like a Gonzaga or like, and I understand everyone saw the exhibition, but there's going to be a team, Gonzaga, Arizona, Kansas, where they're going to put up a bunch of points. And if you hit that rut, I mean, they're going to lose in March, and it's going to be like 15 points. Like that's going to be the margin. Like that's what I think is going to happen because they're going to just hit a lull, and Vescovy is not going to be able to pull them out of it.
This is a classic Rick Barnes team at Tennessee. To your point, we know what the highs look like, right? Beating Kansas pretty handily on a neutral court. That team can win a national championship. You don't get that team all the time. It's the same team that got their ass handed to them by Colorado because they put up an offensive clunker. It's the team that lost to Arizona because they did not have the firepower to keep up. The perfect encapsulation of both sides of this team, I think we saw in that Maryland game, where the first half, I think Maryland scored like 15 points. Tennessee was up by 21. Offense looked fine. They limited Maryland from doing anything Maryland wanted to do. They were dominant. Maryland had a shot to win the game at the end because Tennessee put up a clunker in the second half and could not score. You cannot do that in the NCAA tournament. You do that, you get the crowd behind the team that's coming back, all the extracurriculars that go into that, but you're going to play teams that are better than Maryland. Maryland is not who you're going to face in a national championship game. I think. Right. If Maryland makes it that far, Kevin Willard deserves a statue and all sorts of things. Like that is a round of 32 game. Coincidentally, or perhaps not coincidentally, it's when Tennessee lost last year to Michigan. Like I think a Sweet 16 berth is probably what we're looking at before Tennessee faces a team that they either have to outscore, which they won't be able to do, or they'll put up a clunker before them. Like, I think that's the ceiling. So from a Final Four national championship perspective, total pretender.
Yeah.
Talk about the other SEC teams. The last 2 here in the top 10 are Alabama and Arkansas. You said you had one of them as the favorite, so I'm coupling these because I want to know from you which one is your favorite. Which one do you believe in more?
Alabama. I trust the floor of Arkansas. I think Musselman's a great coach. I think Arkansas has its issues. that, they can't shoot threes. They're worse than Texas at shooting threes.
Yeah.
Even though I understand Alabama turns the ball over a lot.
A lot is an understatement.
A lot is an understatement. I understand that there are questions about their defense. They don't force turnovers. That said, in the loss to Gonzaga, I actually gained more trust in Alabama because Gonzaga put up 100 points. That's just what Gonzaga does. Alabama turned the ball over, 25 times? And still almost crossed 90. And I understand Gonzaga's defense isn't that great, but if you watched that game, this is a case of Alabama's going to have games where it's Alabama has Brandon Miller and the other team doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, are they at the top of my contender list? No. Of the teams in the top 10 that we've talked about that I said were contenders, they're probably fifth of the five on that list. But they have Brandon Miller. They have a really good, solid, they can go through lulls, but have a solid, experienced backcourt. It's just this is the first team that Nate Oates has put together where I can see them winning 6 games in a row because they're going to put up points. And they have that guy. They have that player that can elevate them.
Yeah, I think so too. I think we will know how it to me, Alabama's a team that's either going to lose in the first weekend because they turn it over a ton, or they're winning the whole thing.
Yeah.
Right, and there's not a lot in between. They have phenomenal guard play. They can get phenomenal guard play. Their guards are extremely talented, and they have, I think, more depth there than pretty much anybody else in the country. They have Brandon Miller. That's certainly a big positive. The only thing is the turnovers, and they have 3 months to clean that up. Last year, they looked like this and then fell apart once they got into SEC play. Other factors were in play. They don't seem to be there this year, but you're also relying on a lot of freshmen in Bama's rotation. Can they hold up? Can you fix the turnovers? So there are questions Bama has to answer, but from what they've shown so far, they have the potential. So I put them as in the contender category as well.
Yeah, and they have a lot of freshmen, but also you've got Javon Quinterly as your point guard, who's a senior, who, as we spoke about last year, puts in the extra work, gets in those optional shooting sessions. Mark Sears,
even if he's the only one there.
Yeah, Mark Sears, who's had his ups and downs this season, but again, he's been there, done that. Noah Gurley has looked pretty good this year. You have Brandon Miller as a freshman. Charles Bediako has looked great too. And then you've got 2 freshmen. You've got Jaden Bradley. You've got Noah Clowney. But you're not relying on them. They can have bad games, and Alabama still puts up 85-90, right? So Brandon Miller can't have a bad game, but the other 2 freshmen can. So I think they're probably towards the top of my list of contenders, behind the 4 that we named earlier, or I named earlier.
Arkansas, I'm putting on the pretender list for the same reason you mentioned, the lack of 3-point shooting, and the health questions about Nick Smith. If Nick Smith is healthy, I'm very interested to see how this changes the dynamic of Arkansas's team, because I think he can open up a lot of those shots and give guys better looks than they are getting, and also better shots than they're taking right now. There is some poor shot selection in play there. The fact that Nick Smith isn't healthy still, and they're having to load manage him as a freshman in December, is concerning a little bit. So I don't want to go all in yet. They're probably the most prove it to me of the top 10, maybe why they're at 10. So I have to put them as a pretender for now, but I'll be very intrigued to see what they look like, as I am all Eric Musselman teams, come mid-February.
Well, that's the top 10. I figured we could finish off just by, one additional contender that you have faith in that could win the title that's outside the top 10. at this point in the season. So why don't you start?
I have UNC, and they're my preseason pick. So I know it's going to be hard for me, I think, to jump off of them. Although I did jump off of them after that loss to Virginia Tech. They looked bad. They were running really poor offense. The win they had over Michigan most recently was, I think, a turning point for me. The Ohio State game and the Michigan game. The offense they ran in those games was the offense they ran the second half of last season when it was good, and not what they ran the first 9 games of the year. There was player movement, off-ball action. It was more than just pick and roll, Caleb Love, RJ Davis, go chuck it up. Right? So that matters too. I also looked up this stat, or found this stat, which is going to be published in Ralph Report, the most recent Ralph Report that's going to be up on HXCBB.com. Since Florida went back-to-back in 2006-2007, UNC is the third team that made the championship game the year before to basically bring its core back and run it back, try again. So you have the 06-07 Florida team, 2010-2011 Butler team, the 2016-17 UNC team, and then this year's UNC team. The first 9 games that each of those teams played, UNC started 5-4. Right, the first 9 games, so I picked that cutoff. This UNC team was 2-4 against Ken Pom top 100 teams. The 2010-2011 Butler team was 0-3 against Ken Pom top 100 teams. The defending national champion Florida Gators, brought everybody back, was 0-2 against Ken Pom top 100 teams in their first 9 games. The rest of the season, they became the teams that we remember them as. Right? Florida won back-to-back national championships. Butler made it back to the title game. The 2016-17 UNC team won the national championship, beat Gonzaga. Well, since those first 9 games, UNC is 4-0, 2-0 against Ken Pom top 100 teams, beating Ohio State and Michigan. I think there's something to UNC might be turning things around now. On top of the fact that they just look better and are running things smoother. The most recent, I think, teams we can compare them to had similar turnarounds that happen right about now. So I think UNC could be turning their season around right now.
Yeah, I mean, and it's for me, it was lack of effort right at the beginning of the year. I think they've shown the effort the past 2 games, so I trust them. Mine's UCLA, and I tweeted this out the other day when they were playing Kentucky. Like, I think everyone just forgot about UCLA. They had the really bad tournament against Illinois and Baylor, and have really good since. Good defense, good offense. You've got just a really steady point guard in Tiger Campbell. You've got Jaime Jaquez, who does all the dirty work, plus he can score. I really like what I see from Jalen Clark as kind of that wing scorer that they lost with Johnny Juzang. Amari Bailey is that NBA guard, I think. Like, I think he can eventually become that level. And Adam Bona is just a solid big, and that's what UCLA needs. So this kind of reminds me of the UCLA of the past 2 years, which, again, went to the Final Four and then finished top 10. Was like a top 10 caliber team when healthy last year. And I just think that they're a team that too many people are sleeping on. Because unlike Arizona, where they have ups and downs, UCLA have those 2 bad games, but they've been kind of steady Eddie, really good the past 3 or 4 weeks. So I like UCLA. They'd probably be at the bottom of my list of contenders, but I think that they're just as big a contender as some of the other teams. Yeah,
I'm with you as well. I think they're certainly the favorite. Well, I say certainly the favorite. I think I trust them more in Arizona to win the Pac-12 because of those ups and downs that you mentioned.
Yeah.
Well, thank you guys for listening or watching if you're on YouTube to this episode of the Heat Check Hangout. We'll, again, try and be back on our weekly schedule as we get going here in the new year. It's been a really fun, entertaining start of the season, and hope you'll stay with us for the rest of it. Our co-host, Connor Hope. I'm Brian Ralph. Thank you guys again. Talk to you again next time.
Basketball, college. Basketball, college. Oh, is that time already? Whoa, basketball, college. Come on. Basketball, college. Basketball, college. Whoa, basketball, college.